On February 18, 2023, the arid, sweeping winds of the Sahel carried away much more than just the red dust of the Burkinabe desert. They carried away the fading remnants of an empire's grip. In the capital city of Ouagadougou and across the northern frontiers, the final convoys of French military forces packed up their heavy equipment, lowered their flags, and began their long-overdue withdrawal. For a woman named Aminata, standing near the battered outskirts of Djibo, a town that had borne the cruelest, most unforgiving brunt of extremist violence, the sight of those foreign armored vehicles rumbling away into the distance did not bring a sense of fear or vulnerability. Instead, it brought a quiet, profound sense of relief. For nearly a decade, Aminata had watched foreign soldiers, armed with the most sophisticated and expensive weaponry the Western world could manufacture, patrol the skies and roads of her homeland. Yet, despite their overwhelming, highly publicized presence, the fires of insurgency only grew hotter. She had seen her neighbors perish, her community fractured, and the local markets reduced to ashes. The so-called foreign protectors, cloaked in the noble rhetoric of counterterrorism, had become entirely indistinguishable from the chaos they claimed to manage. This departure, therefore, was not viewed as a tragedy by the Burkinabe people. It was an eviction, under the steadfast, uncompromising leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Burkina Faso is doing much more than simply closing the heavy iron door on its French colonial past. It is boldly opening a new one, charting a course toward a horizon defined by the global South, and specifically, the rising economic and geopolitical coalition known as BRICS. This pivot is a revealing moment in modern global history. It is the story of an African nation deciding once and for all that true sovereignty cannot be borrowed, and that the geopolitical theater of the African continent will no longer be directed from the comfortable corridors of Paris, London, or Washington. To understand the magnitude of this shift, we must first look at the grand illusion of security that Western powers have peddled in Africa for decades. The inception of military interventions like Operation Barkhane and Operation Sabre was sold to the global public as a benevolent, necessary shield against the rising tide of jihadist extremism in West Africa. The narrative was meticulously crafted, civilized Western powers stepping in to save a fragile African state from total collapse. But the reality on the ground, the reality lived by mothers like Aminata, told a vastly different, more sinister story. In Djibo, as in many other resource-rich regions across the Sahel, the architecture of Western military intervention revealed its true priorities. Heavily fortified foreign military bases were erected, equipped with advanced surveillance drones that buzzed relentlessly in the night sky. Yet, just a few miles beyond those concrete walls, entire villages were routinely left defenseless against militant attacks. From 2015 onward, the violence did not recede under Western watch. It metastasized, spreading like a deadly contagion, targeting both innocent civilians and local security forces. It became aggressively clear that this Western security model was never genuinely designed to bring lasting peace to the Sahel. Rather, it was a sophisticated mechanism of strategic containment and resource surveillance. Western capitals have historically viewed the Sahel not as a sacred homeland of ancient civilizations, vibrant cultures, and resilient communities, but as an exploitable chessboard. It is a region possessing immense geological wealth, veins of gold that stretch deep into the earth, and uranium deposits critical for powering foreign cities, while local Burkinabe towns remain in darkness. The failure of this militarized approach was the final breaking straw for the people of Burkina Faso. They realized a painful but liberating truth. Western powers were not in Africa to extinguish the fire. They were there to carefully manage the blaze, ensuring they maintained control over the land's vast resources while the country itself slowly burned. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, deeply attuned to the collective suffering and historical memory of his countrymen, recognized that you cannot entrust the security and future of your house to the very architects who benefit from its structural instability. The Western approach to African engagement was a glaring contradiction. It offered a heavily militarized band-aid while completely ignoring, and often directly exacerbating, the deep, bleeding economic wounds inflicted by centuries of exploitation. Traoré's decisive move to sever these military ties was the essential first step in a much larger strategy. He understood that before a nation can build a new economic reality, it must first rid itself of the foreign military presence that exists solely to enforce the old one. The illusion of Western protection had finally been shattered, paving the way for a radical realignment of Burkina Faso's destiny. Yet, the departure of foreign troops was only the removal of a physical garrison. The true enduring occupation of Burkina Faso, and indeed much of Francophone Africa, has always been invisible. It is not enforced by military boots on the ground, but rather dictated through ledger books, foreign reserves, and international banking policies. For decades, the most brutal and devastating weapon wielded against the Burkinabe people was not the machine gun. It was the suffocating grip of neo-colonial finance. Throughout the latter half of the 20th century and well into the 21st, the absolute control over African sovereignty was masterminded by Western financial institutions, most notably the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The grand narrative of Western engagement has always been wrapped in the benevolent language of foreign aid and development. But when we examine the historical record, a stark and damaging reality emerges. When a nation like Burkina Faso sought capital to build modern hospitals for mothers like Aminata, or schools to educate the bright, resilient children of Djibo, the loans offered by Western capitals were never merely financial transactions. They came laden with punitive, structural adjustments. These Western institutions demanded the immediate privatization of national resources, forcing African states to sell their sovereign wealth to foreign corporations for pennies on the dollar. They mandated severe austerity measures, ordering governments to violently slash public spending on essential healthcare, education, and agricultural subsidies that kept local farming families alive. For Aminata, the geopolitical decisions made in the boardrooms of Washington and Paris translated into a very brutal, localized reality: a lack of medicine at the local clinic, no infrastructure to bring clean water to her village, and a constant manufactured state of poverty. But perhaps the most egregious, the most deeply entrenched mechanism of this financial servitude is the CFA franc. Created in the colonial era, this currency was designed to legally tether the economies of 14 African nations directly to the French treasury. For generations, these nominally independent African states were required to deposit a massive percentage of their foreign exchange reserves into the central bank of their former colonizer. France held the power to dictate monetary policy, effectively maintaining a veto over the economic destiny of millions of African citizens. It is a system of profound indignity, ensuring that the wealth extracted from the African soil implicitly subsidizes the lavish prosperity of European cities. Through this lens, it becomes painfully clear that Western aid was never a charitable gift. It was a highly calculated investment designed to maintain a deeply unequal geopolitical status quo. It was the purchase of obedience. Recognizing that military independence means nothing without economic liberation, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has fundamentally shifted the paradigm. His administration's calculated, strategic pivot toward the BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is not a spontaneous reaction. It is a methodical dismantling of the neo-colonial financial architecture. Naturally, the Western mainstream media is quick to frame this transition with profound condescension. They suggest that African nations, by turning away from the West, are naively falling into the arms of Eastern powers. They aggressively push the narrative that Burkina Faso is merely swapping one colonial master for another. This framing is a damaging embarrassment to the truth and a deep insult to African intelligence. It completely misses the profound strategic awakening taking place across the Sahel. Traoré's choice of BRICS is not driven by ideological blindness. It is driven by an uncompromising demand for agency. What the BRICS consortium offers, particularly through institutions like the New Development Bank, is a radically different approach to global partnership. They provide the capital necessary for monumental infrastructure projects, expansive railway networks, modern solar energy grids, and robust agricultural facilities. But crucially, they do so without the heavy, paternalistic hand of political interference. When a BRICS nation invests, they do not arrive with a mandate demanding that Burkina Faso rewrite its constitution. They do not dictate how the Burkinabe government must manage its internal social policies, nor do they force the privatization of the nation's gold and lithium reserves into foreign hands. For the first time in modern history, an alliance of nations from the global South, many of whom share a deep historical understanding of the trauma of colonialism and Western exploitation, is offering a model of mutual respect and horizontal cooperation. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not looking for a foreign savior. The historical memory of the African continent is far too long and far too scarred by betrayal to trust in saviors. Instead, Traoré is demanding a seat at the geopolitical table as an absolute equal. He is demonstrating to the world that Burkina Faso is no longer a passive pawn to be sacrificed in a global chess match dictated by Western interests. By aligning with BRICS, he is transforming his nation into a sovereign player, determined to write its own destiny. The goal is clear: to build an economy where the vast riches beneath the soil finally serve the people walking upon it, ensuring that the generations to come will inherit a continent that belongs fully and unapologetically to them. To fully grasp the historical gravity of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's leadership, we must look backward into the blood-stained soil of the 1980s. History, as the proverb goes, does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes with a haunting precision. For the elder generation of Burkina Faso, for resilient women like Aminata, whose memory stretches far back into the days of her youth, the current political atmosphere sweeping across the Sahel feels intensely, almost spiritually, familiar. It powerfully evokes the unyielding spirit of one of the most revered figures in modern Black history, Thomas Sankara. In 1984, it was the visionary Sankara who boldly discarded the colonial name, Upper Volta, a title slapped onto the map by European cartographers, and rebaptized the nation as Burkina Faso, meaning the land of upright men. Sankara understood, with a prophetic clarity that terrified Western capitals, that political independence was an empty, hollow prize if it was not anchored by absolute economic self-reliance. He famously and defiantly declared to the world that he who feeds you controls you. Sankara actively rejected the predatory, conditional loans of the International Monetary Fund, championed domestic food sovereignty, and sought to build a proud, self-sufficient nation from the ground up. relying on the sweat and brilliance of his own people. Tragically, that brilliant flame of Pan-African liberation was extinguished by an assassin's bullet in 1987. It was a brutal murder, widely understood by historians and the African diaspora to have been orchestrated with the quiet blessing of foreign powers, powers that were absolutely terrified of the precedent a truly independent, thriving African state would set. Aminata vividly remembers the suffocating, unbearable grief that blanketed her village the day Thomas Sankara fell. For more than 3 agonizing decades that followed, under governments that happily compromised with Western interests, it seemed that the dream of an upright, uncompromised African nation had been buried alongside him in a shallow grave. But ideas, especially those forged in the sacred fires of righteous liberation, do not die. They lie dormant in the soil, waiting for the right season and the right rain to bloom once more. Today, looking at the young, resolute, and uncompromising figure of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Aminata and millions of others across the continent see the undeniable reincarnation of that very same Pan-African spirit. Traoré is systematically picking up the shattered pieces of Sankara's vision and reassembling them for the fierce geopolitical realities of the 21st century. The geopolitical mirror is striking and undeniable. Just as Sankara refused international food aid to break the humiliating cycle of dependency, Traoré is aggressively nationalizing control over key sectors of the Burkinabe economy. He is fearlessly renegotiating the notoriously lopsided mining contracts that previously allowed massive foreign corporations to siphon off the nation's gold, enriching European markets while leaving the local population in destitute poverty. By asserting sovereign ownership over natural resources, and by forming the formidable alliance of Sahel states, AES, alongside neighboring Mali and Niger, Traoré is physically manifesting the very Pan-African unity that Sankara bled for. This is not merely a temporary policy shift. It is the profound resurrection of a stolen destiny. This profound awakening is sending unprecedented shockwaves through the marbled corridors of power in Paris, London, and Washington. If you listen closely to the diplomatic rhetoric echoing from Western capitals today, beneath the polished statements and geopolitical jargon, you will hear the unmistakable frantic cadence of panic. But make no mistake about the root of this anxiety. This panic is not simply about the loss of access to cheap West African gold, uranium, or strategic military outposts. The fear gripping the West is far more existential. It is the absolute terror of a crumbling ideological monopoly. For decades, the West has aggressively positioned its highly specific model of neoliberal capitalism, conditional aid, and structural adjustment as the only viable path to progress for the global South. They meticulously crafted a global narrative, dictating that an African nation could not possibly survive without Western oversight, Western currency controls, and the paternalistic approval of Western institutions. But Traoré's decisive pivot toward the BRICS alliance poses a serious diplomatic shock to this deeply entrenched, arrogant worldview. If Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation historically written off and dismissed by the West as perpetually impoverished and helpless, can successfully leverage BRICS partnerships to build roads, generate sovereign power grids, and stabilize its economy on its own terms, the entire neo-colonial narrative collapses overnight. The Western establishment understands the concept of the domino effect better than anyone. They look at the map of West Africa today and see the alliance of Sahel states, carving out a massive, contiguous block of sovereign defiance right in the heart of the motherland. If this bold model of self-determination produces tangible results, What is to stop it from spreading to the wealthy coastal economic hubs? What happens when the rest of the African continent realizes that they, too, can successfully walk away from the suffocating conditionalities of the IMF and the geopolitical manipulation of their former colonizers? This fear explains why we are currently witnessing a frantic, highly coordinated public relations campaign aimed at discrediting Traoré and the AES. Suddenly, Western media outlets, human rights organizations, and policy think tanks are churning out relentless reports citing deep, sudden concerns over democratic backsliding and the supposed dangers of aligning with Eastern powers. The hypocrisy is staggering and deeply insulting. For generations, when Western mining conglomerates were displacing African communities, when the CFA franc was economically strangling entire nations, and when foreign-backed dictators like Blaise Compaoré were kept in power for decades to ensure the steady flow of resources to Europe, these same capitals were deafeningly silent on the issue of human rights. Their sudden moral outrage is not a genuine defense of the Burkinabe people. It is a desperate, transparent attempt to maintain a geopolitical hegemony that is rapidly slipping through their fingers. It is a damaging embarrassment for a global power structure that has completely forgotten how to engage with Africa as anything other than a subordinate. The historic shift toward BRICS is proving to the world that the parameters of human progress are no longer defined exclusively by the West. Africa is finally, and firmly, writing its own rulebook. The journey that Captain Ibrahim Traoré and the people of Burkina Faso are undertaking today is vastly more significant than a mere reshuffling of diplomatic allegiances. It is a profound, earth-shattering rejection of centuries of global paternalism. By deliberately stepping away from the deeply flawed, deeply exploitative Western financial frameworks and stepping toward the cooperative potential of the BRICS alliance, Burkina Faso is doing the sacred work of reclaiming Black dignity on the world stage. They are forcefully dismantling the old, racist paradigm that insisted African nations were inherently incapable of managing their own extraordinary wealth or defining their own developmental destiny. This bold realignment is a powerful testament to the enduring resilience of the African spirit, a spirit that has survived the horrors of formal colonization and the insidious, invisible traps of modern financial imperialism. Let us return, finally, to the dusty, resilient outskirts of Djibo, where Aminata stands watching the sunset over the Sahel. The landscape before her is beginning to feel fundamentally different. The oppressive mechanical hum of foreign military drones, the very machines that for years brought nothing but anxiety and a false, hollow sense of security, has finally faded into the vast, ancient silence of the desert. In their place is a new, palpable energy. Aminata looks at the young children playing in the dirt courtyards, a generation that will now grow up breathing an entirely different kind of air. They are children who will not look up to the sky and see the threatening shadows of foreign military helicopters monitoring their homeland. Instead, they will look up into the clear, unbroken expanse of a sky that finally, belongs to them. They will grow up in a nation where the gold mined from their earth is used to build their own schools, where agricultural policies are designed to feed their own families, and where their leaders sit at the global table, not as subordinate clients pleading for conditional aid, but as dignified, equal partners shaping the future of a multipolar world. This is not merely the dawn of a new political era for Burkina Faso. It is the breaking of a brilliant new day for the entire global African diaspora. For those of us who have spent decades fighting for civil rights, demanding systemic justice, and fiercely preserving the rich, proud history of our ancestors across the oceans, This monumental moment across the Atlantic requires our absolute attention and our unwavering solidarity. We are witnessing the physical, tangible manifestation of the Pan-African dream that our courageous elders spoke of with such deep reverence and longing. The heavy chains of neo-colonial dependency are finally being broken, link by heavy link, by the upright men and women of the Sahel. As we watch this beautiful, complex, and fiercely independent motherland rise from the ashes of foreign exploitation, let us ensure our voices are part of this historic chorus. If you believe in the undeniable sovereignty of Africa, and if you are inspired by this monumental shift toward true global equity, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and join our growing community in the comments below. Share your thoughts, share your history, and let us continue to document together the glorious reclamation of the African continent. The world is changing, the motherland is boldly reclaiming her throne, and our ultimate liberation is undeniably intertwined.